out of our hands, right? Oh, we missed the best bit, and we just started recording then. Anyway,
my apologies.
All right, so it's good to hear that that's sort of pretty typical. It sounds like. So, how do the C-suite actually view this stuff? Well, I'm not. This is not meant to be a finance lesson, and I realise it's very, very simplistic, right? So it's not meant to be holistic or completely detailed, but it's just to give the sort of the nature of how C-suite thinks about maintenance costs. So, and just so we're on the same page, obviously a profit and loss statement is kind of how one of the key parts of how a business runs, and it's about how they make money, right? So a P&L statement is made up of some key categories. One category is the revenue or the income that we get. So we sell the product or service, whatever it is we're doing, and we get some income from that, revenue. And then you've got to take out the costs that you incur to provide that or create that revenue cost. Now people break that into generally two categories, and every organisation will call it something different, right? Variable costs, costs of goods, or something. But there's basically this variable cost category, if you like, which is, and it's usually, well, it's not. It's meant to be things that are directly associated with the volume of product you produce. So if you think of raw materials, that would be a really obvious variable cost. The more product we put through, the more raw materials we've got to get. So we buy more raw materials, the variable costs go up. So it's kind of like goes in line with the revenue. And the other category is fixed costs. So these are, well, we doesn't matter how many raw materials we buy, we have to store them somewhere. So we have raw material silos or tanks or whatever. And so that's maintaining that, perhaps it might be a fixed cost, or just having them there. Workshops, overheads, leadership, all those things are just fixed costs that we incur. No matter how much we put through the business, we got this kind of level of fixed costs. And you make profit by, hopefully your revenue is higher than the sum of your variable costs and your fixed costs, because that's what it's costing you to be in business. So that's a pretty typical view. Now, maintenance costs obviously fits in either variable costs or fixed costs, and we'll talk about where it fits in a minute, but it's a cost to the business. C-suite view on this, and maintenance cost is just one of, like a dozen categories of or more costs for them, depending on the business. They want to increase profit. That's the goal, right? Return to shareholders, usually, if you're in a public company. The only ways to do that are to increase the revenue, or decrease the variable costs, or decrease the fixed costs, or hopefully do all of those, right? If you can do all of them, then great. But that's the focus they have. So the way that they'll view maintenance costs is it'll be in variable or fixed costs, or maybe split. They just want to drive it down and get some revenue. So that's their thinking. So before we talk about, well, how do we sort of start talking to this? Where does maintenance costs actually sit? Does anyone know in their actual business where maintenance costs sit in terms of variable or fixed costs? Does anyone have a handle on that or not?
Ours are reported as fixed.
All of them?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Anyone else know?
Are variable.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's great, right? Like the first people to talk have them in different categories already. And so you'll see the first line there, there's no consistent approach to this, and there's no real right or wrong. Like finance people are magicians, to be quite frank. And somehow they apply this art to what's supposed to be a science. And so there's no kind of single definition associated with this stuff. So it'll be a little bit different. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter as long as you've got the costs captured, and then you understand the C-suite is going to want to drive those down. Generally speaking, organisations will try to split it. In most organisations I see, it can sit in one or the other, but they'll try to split it a little bit in the sense of they have overheads, which is workshops, equipment, the leadership, the org structure, that sort of stuff. And then variable costs might be generally not routine maintenance, but theoretically anything associated with, well, the more product we put through, the higher the cost goes. So you could say routine maintenance, but it's usually more things like contractors and stuff like that, if there's fluctuating based on revenue as they can attribute it, they'll seek to do that. In actual fact, I would, in most cases, I would tend to think, this is where it gets interesting, tend to think about maintenance costs as a fixed cost up to a point. Now, I'll clarify what I mean by that is you have fixed costs are kind of, well, we've got this much cost and it kind of doesn't matter how much revenue or throughput we're putting through, which is true to a point for maintenance, because if you play around with the level of routine maintenance that you're doing, maybe you reduce it by 5% in terms of costs. And if you look at your resource profile, do you actually reduce the number of resources that are actually doing the maintenance? In other words, do you decrease the maintenance team size? And most people don't. So whilst you can kind of budget out, and if you do a task kind of based or zero-based budget, you'll look like you're reducing by 5%. But when you actually executing your business, you don't actually reduce the number of resources you've got. So you don't really effectively save the money. Now, it's to a point, because if you chop the maintenance spend annually by 30%, you'll probably see organizations will start to reduce the workforce. And the same when they put throughput up. It's got to go up high enough that they now need more resources because there's more maintenance versus just having the current workforce deal with it. So that's the kind of way that it typically works. But nonetheless, the C-suite, wherever it sits and however it's structured, they're going to want to just press it down. So this is where I think sometimes we don't really help and connect with them on their level, because and this is what started this for me. We'll say things like maintenance is not a cost center, it's a profit center. Anyone want to throw in a comment or a view on why we say that? And I'm assuming, have people heard that before? Hands up if that's yes. One only.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've heard it, and I think it's probably in an attempt to make it more acceptable to the C-suite. So it sounds like it's something that's, and we know it adds value, right? But it's trying to get on the same level, same playing field, and like try to make a pitch for how it does add value.
Couldn't agree more, Gary. I think that's exactly why it was created. It was an attempt to encourage the C-suite not to view maintenance cost as an expense, as a cost item, but as a potential, now what, profit item. I don't know. It's kind of like, it feels to me, when I really started thinking about that, it kind of feels like saying that raw materials is a profit center, because if you buy more raw materials, you can get more product, right? Like you spend more on maintenance, you can, well, yeah, that's obvious, but it's not, it's a weird way to frame it, I think, right? So that they actually don't think of it that way.
Yeah.
And the other thing that when I really started thinking about this a lot is if it's actually almost an admission of suboptimal maintenance, right? Because we're kind of saying if we view maintenance as a profit center, we can optimize it and we'll deliver more performance, which actually means we're not optimal right now. So there's a little, it's a weird relationship there.
Yeah, and I think if you flip it as well, Jason, and you say, if it was me who was sitting in the C-suite, I'd say, well, okay, prove to me how much profit you've generated.
Yeah.
How would you do that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then you got to be careful, right? Because you can go down a path of talking about sort of values that are intangible, right? Like you start talking about risk that you've perhaps reduced, or you saved this shutdown from happening because we did this good work or whatever. And those sort of things, they don't show up on the balance sheet. So it's really hard for them to wrap their heads around that stuff if it's too kind of nebulous. We also tend to stand behind expert opinion. I think asset managers, maintenance managers, reliability people, in the absence of data, if we get challenged, we get a little uncomfortable, and we tend to express our expert opinion, and that's why we're hired, because we understand this stuff, and you sort of it's almost like trust us, right? And again, C-suite, they just want numbers and data, right? And interestingly, sometimes the numbers don't necessarily have to be that accurate, particularly if you can play some sensitivity around it. But it's like, get it out of someone's head and onto a bit of paper, and it's now a bit data, and then you can start having a conversation around it. we compromise, we defer, we stretch outages or repair activities. We push them into the next financial year so it doesn't impact the budget, you know, and all those sorts of things. And as we talked about earlier, we increase the risk of the business because we're under pressure to do so. It's not really documented risk, really. So that does two things. A, it's not good for maintenance managers or asset managers because we carry the risk around with us, waiting for the phone to ring in the middle of the night because something's, you know, failed or whatever. The flip side of that, of course, is the C-suite or the leadership, whoever it is doing this, they think the challenging and the pressure worked, right? So they've applied pressure to reduce, and human nature is we'll do our best. So we do our best, but we carry the risk, and then we kind of prove the point that the challenging worked. And of course, then we go around the cycle again. And we also talk about wanting to make sure we have a whole of life view, and all of us on the call, I'm sure, would agree that having the view of a sort of whole of life of asset from a cost perspective is the right thing to do. And leadership will as well, absolutely. But at the end of the day, they'll be focused on much shorter term cost viewpoints of that. And they will see high cost preventative or corrective actions, and they will want to influence them because they're the big levers they think that we can pull to save some money. So we've got this kind of disparity now between a long-term view and like next year's budget. So I think there's ways in which we've attempted to perhaps try and help. We try and have the conversation, but maybe we haven't really thought about C-suite, how they view it, and perhaps what they see as their role, which is just to challenge the cost and reduce it, right? Like we might think that they're perhaps being aggressive or whatever, but the reality is that's their role. Their role is to increase profitability, and they can only do that by increasing revenue or decreasing the costs, and so it's a natural part of their role. So that's kind of a bit of a current state of play, I would say, for most organisations. So now we're going to kick into some of the complexities that contribute to this. Before we get there, I just want to clear up on some definitions and some sort of fundamentals as I think about them, just so we're on the same page, right? I'm not suggesting people don't know this stuff already, but just want to get us all lined up. And I'm also not suggesting these are the definitions that everyone needs to run with, right? Like, because people can define things however they see fit. It's more about when I say these things, this is what I'm meaning, and they're used through the presentation. So routine maintenance for me is anything that's performed on a kind of fixed schedule, be that calendar or usage based. Doesn't matter if it's, you know, every month or it's every 10,000 hours of operating hours. Doesn't matter, but something that we do on a sort of a regular basis. Preventive maintenance is a task that prevents failures from happening. And preventive maintenance, if you do it on a regular basis, obviously is routine maintenance, right? So preventive maintenance is a category of routine maintenance, and it's a task that prevents failures from happening. So the schedule repairs, replacements, lubrication, calibration, all the doing type tasks. There's inspections and condition assessments. So they're tasks that you don't actually do anything other than check something to see if it's still okay. There's online monitoring condition assessment, which is the same as an inspection, except it's not a human going to check something every so often, even if they've got a widget to help them check it, but it's a device sitting on the asset doing that for them. Corrective maintenance, maybe sometimes called secondary maintenance. This is what you do if the inspection or the online monitoring says, oh, there's some degradation, we're going to go do a repair or replacement or whatever. I call that the corrective action, secondary action. Breakdown maintenance is obvious. Well, it failed, we've got to go fix it. And these next two I'm going to come back to when we get to the slide that uses them, because I just want to cover off on this really simple diagram, because I think it's important that we start communicating effectively and really simplify asset management and maintenance and this balance that we have for others that don't understand the discipline as much as we do. So I've got a blue box at the top there called maintenance tasks. So this encapsulates all the maintenance tasks there are. Then I've got routine maintenance. Within routine maintenance, there's only two types of tasks you can do. You can call tasks whatever you like: schedule, discard, you know, shut down, overhaul, replacement, whatever, predictive maintenance, inspection, condition assessment, I don't care. But fundamentally, you've got two categories of tasks, is what I'm saying. You've got preventive type tasks and inspection type tasks. And the reason the distinction is important is that they influence the costs that you see and you total up in different ways if you change them. So it's really important that people, and as an organisation, we communicate this across the organisation, that there's only those two kind of tasks. We either do things on a fixed basis that prevent failure from happening. So we do this task every 6 months, so we never see that failure occur. Or you go check in some capacity. So we go check every so often, and then at some point we find some degradation, and we have to then do a corrective. So you'll see the arrow going from inspection to corrective or secondary action. We've now got a plan in the corrective action. That's outside of routine maintenance, obviously, because we do it on condition. But that's a category of task. And then there's breakdown tasks, and that's it. There's 4 tasks. That's it. It's all when you're sort of working out costs, if you like, and then what happens if you change the costs of these things. These 4 categories are really important, and that's all there is. They're the only 4 categories. Now, there is monitoring or online monitoring, condition monitoring down the bottom there outside of tasks. That's where you put a device on an asset and you monitor it some capacity, and usually you've got alarm levels around it, or maybe you've got really sophisticated machine learning based models and digital twins and all sorts of stuff. Doesn't matter. What they're doing is they're monitoring for degradation. And when you see the degradation or the system alarms when the degradation is present, then you obviously go up to corrective if you're planning that secondary corrective action and effect the repair. So that's how I think really simply about the structure of tasks that sum up to give us the costs of maintenance. Everyone okay with that? Any questions? Any comments? I will take silence as we're all okay. Yeah, good. So that's pretty straightforward, but it is important, I think, that we get an organisation on the same page when we're talking about this stuff, because the first complexity is the balance of preventive, condition-based, or inspection, if you like, and then secondary action and breakdown, right? It's a really important balance, and that's why those costs are really important as well. And the reason is because we promote this as asset managers, that there's this triangle of cost, risk, and performance. You'll see it in ISO 55000. We talk about it all the time, right? Our role is to balance risk, cost, and performance. And the basis of that relationship that we're promoting is that if you reduce costs, then there will be an impact on performance and or risk, right? Like you can't have everything. You can't have super low costs, super low risk, and super high performance, right? Like the lines won't let you do that, right? So hopefully everyone's kind of familiar with this this sort of triangle, and what you'll have a dot. If you drew this for your organization, you would have a dot somewhere where it's like the cost is what it is, the performance is what it is, and the risk is what you're carrying. And the C-suite pressure, of course, is always to reduce the costs. And our first expert opinion guidance is, well, we can't do that because we'll impact performance, right? We can reduce the cost, but then you're going to see breakdowns and we're going to impact performance, or maybe risk is going to go up, or some see catastrophic failures, whatever it is. Because our thinking is that this is what's going to happen inside of the maintenance budget, if you like. We're going to reduce spend on the routine maintenance, because when you look at a budget and we're under pressure to get dollars out of this year's budget or next year's budget, whatever it is, there's only 2 things we can really influence. That is routine maintenance. So in other words, we got these fixed time things we're going out to do, and we're gonna I don't know, extend them, or we're going to turn some off, whatever. We're going to save some money. Or we're looking at a really significant corrective action. So we've done some inspections. We know we've got to repair this thing. We know it's due for a big overhaul, but we're going to try and push that corrective into next year. So that's all we can do in terms of reduced costs. You can't stop fixing breakdowns. But what we promote, of course, is through that balance, that if we reduce these things, then breakdowns are likely to go up. That may not ultimately impact maintenance cost, but the breakdowns, unplanned failures, our operations is offline, we're impacting performance, hence that performance line suffers. So that's what we promote, right? I guess the question is, or the statement first is, that balance and what I'm proposing there is only really true if we've got optimal maintenance, right? That balance is only true if we've got optimal maintenance. So my question is, does that exist, right? Like, if you were critical about your operations, is it possible to cut some maintenance spend and not impact performance or increase risk, right? What would people say? I mean, would you accept maybe that there's an opportunity to trim down some maintenance spend and not impact performance if it's the right maintenance that you're trimming? Or do you think that you're at optimal?
I think what we've seen with this is there's always a delay. So yeah, you can cut the budgets this year, but because you've been maintaining things to a certain level and you've been investing in and spending the capex to kind of renew things, what tends to happen is there's typically 3 to 5 years kind of delay on some of these big bits of kit. So yeah, you can, but it's often in the post.
That's a really good point, Richard. Thanks for jumping in. And actually, I think that's the second or third complexity that I talk about. But you're exactly right. There can be some time delay on some of this in terms of taking an action and then seeing the impact. But I guess the question really is, are we maybe over maintaining anything, right? That you can maybe trim some cost out of, or maybe extend some intervals, or are we all at optimal maintenance? Because my very confident assertion would be there's always an opportunity to, let's say, optimize our maintenance, which probably means we can trim it to some degree if we haven't, as of yesterday, finished a significant strategy review exercise. And that's just because things are changing all the time. Anyway, we're gonna come back to that. So just ponder on that for a second as we skip through the rest of this, because this is what it comes down to. You've probably all seen this optimal maintenance curve, or hopefully you all have, where if you plotted the cost of the task, the less often you do the task, obviously the annual cost goes down. But the less often you do the task, then the cost of failure, or even if it's a risk cost, right, increases the less often you do it. And if you add all that up, you get this sort of supposedly U-shaped curve. And if you pick the low spot on that curve, you're at the optimal maintenance, right? Like, that's the best cost scenario for the business to do that, considering the cost of the task and the cost of the failure. That's the theory. And so that balance we're talking about is all on the basis that every task we do is actually at the optimum interval. So we're assuming that that's the case as it is. Now, if you actually run that analysis for every task you do, you'll find that you're probably not at optimal. And you'll probably find for several tasks, it looks like this little chart I've got on the right here, where the total cost is going down and down and down, meaning it's actually not cost effective to do the task ever. So turn it off. So that can happen quite a lot as well. But this is what it looks like. Now, the challenge is that if you went into an organization and you did that for every single task, you'd probably find that all of the analysis would yield something like this. Some of the tasks we are doing, but we're not quite at optimum interval. Some of the tasks we're doing and they're just not worth doing at all, right? Now, why is that? Why would that be? Any thoughts on why we would not be maintaining optimum intervals?
Do you mean by design, or do you mean just because of organisational development, or
any reason?
Yeah, you don't know. You don't know what the optimal. You need data to suggest it. Again, it depends on how well ultimately the line fails because of a component. So it's down to, you've got to do your strategy on that component level, and it depends how those components are maintained and looked after, how long the life cycle is. So it's unless you do what you think is the perfect maintenance to maximize that life cycle, it can fail early, late, whenever. So it's hard to do that. And you obviously relying on people
Yeah.
And technicians to do the right thing. So there's variation there as well.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge just to understand what that perfect interval is. Full stop.
I think you're dead right, John. Thanks for jumping in. I mean, you said it's hard to get the data, right? Like, absolutely, it's hard to get the data. So the data required to drive this kind of analysis on every single task is significant. Yes, you can get it out of people's heads, and that's a good guide. So it can be done, right? Like, yes, it can be done, but it is a big effort, and it does take lots of data. There's a host of other reasons there, and you started talking about people. I think there's some practicalities with it as well. You might determine that the optimum interval is, you know, I don't know, 23 days and 4 hours, right? Well, that's great, but that's like hardly practical, right? So we also schedule these things into logical groups of tasks, into packages that fit with the operation. So there's obviously operational and logistical constraints as well. There's the challenge of grouping these things together across different assets, so it all gets complicated, and we've got to try and line up what's the optimal to maintain maybe an asset or a system, not just one task. So there's all these sort of practicalities. Fundamentally, however, I think that the reason this is the case a lot of the time is that the operations change all the time, right? So whenever maintenance tasks and schedules were set, and whatever mechanism was used to do that, whether it was just asking an expert or maybe coming up with some study, maybe you did RCM on some things, maybe you did PMO, whatever the mechanism, you might have decided somewhere along the line that these are the right intervals to do these things. Probably 5 years ago, 10 years ago, however long ago, maybe the last time you rolled your EAM system, whatever, things change all the time. Operational context change, duties change, assets get older, everything is changing all the time, which means that at any given point in time, there's probably now things that have changed enough for those intervals to be a little bit out of kilter for some assets, not every asset, but for some assets. So it's a really tough thing to do. So given all that, let's come back to the C-suite's view and how this lines up with it. So, and again, this is not meant to be completely sort of detailed, but it's a simplistic view, but it paints the picture. So C-suite just see total maintenance costs, right? Like, they see one number. That's generally what they're going to focus on. You might put it in a couple of different categories. At the end of the day, their thinking will be, what does maintenance cost? It's a total number, and we need to reduce it. So that's their view. Now, the theoretical balance that and this is a bit of the challenge for us, I think, which we kind of think about, and maybe we don't even talk about it, but it's kind of how we behave with these things, is that we have this theoretical balance where we've got some routine maintenance, we've got some corrective activities we need to then do as part of what we find in the routine maintenance, and then we've got some breakdowns. And that ratio, some people even do assessments around that ratio, right? How's it line up with our competitors? Have we got the right numbers? You know, we shouldn't have any more than 10% breakdowns, or whatever it might be for your business, your industry. And the theory is, of course, as we had in that other diagram, if we drive the routine maintenance down, so if we're under pressure to reduce costs, we can only drive down the routine maintenance, maybe defer a bit of the correctives, then our theory is breakdown will go up. And I can't remember where, Richard, I think it was you that jumped in with it. Sometimes that takes a bit of time to happen, though, right? Like, it might not happen in the same calendar year, if you like. That's true. But fundamentally, it should lead to that outcome. Now, what I'm saying is, reality is that we have routine maintenance and we have corrective maintenance and we have breakdown, but I've put these extra two in here, which is we have a certain volume of routine maintenance that is ineffective, right? We're doing things currently on some kind of schedule that actually don't add any value for whatever reason. Maybe, and this sort of stuff happens all the time, right? Like, we had an asset that we used to maintain, and then the system design changed and it's no longer critical, but we're still going out there and doing the maintenance because it's been in the system for 5 years, 10 years or whatever. Or maybe we've now changed the operations such that there's a bit of redundancy in the system. Whatever it is, there's things that change in our operations that means we've probably got a level of routine maintenance that we're doing that's ineffective. And we've certainly got a level of routine maintenance that's suboptimal. In other words, we're not. It's good maintenance, it's effective maintenance, but it's not quite at its best interval. And even if you take into account the practicalities and all the logistics, you could move some tasks around between, say, your scheduled 2 weekly and your scheduled 4 weekly to save a bit of money, because they're a little bit suboptimal right now. So I would say in every organisation at any given point in time, that's the likely case. So that means if we do things the right way, and obviously that's the key, if we do things the right way, the opportunity is to actually optimize the maintenance that's suboptimal, remove the ineffective maintenance, and therefore you can reduce the total spend and make some savings. That's the reality. Now, it's easy to say, it's hard to execute, but that's the reality. And then there's optimized, which means if you, rather than just, get re-optimize the suboptimal ones, you actually go through the whole system and do some sense of optimization, which means then you probably add in some tasks. So in this case, your routine maintenance might actually increase, but you would only do that if you're going to reduce breakdowns, and it's cost effective to do so. And therefore you can kind of change that mixture of routine, corrective, and breakdown. You still make your savings, but you're adjusting and that should actually drive up performance. So that's the cost view. Let's look at the performance view. C-suite's view is, I've got a cost and I've got a level of performance, and I'm trying to get the cost down. This is the theoretical view. If you reduce routine maintenance, you're going to push breakdowns up. Might take a year or two, but that's going to happen. Performance is going to come down. That's kind of the traditional asset management argument, right, that we have. You reduce the budget, we can't do it, performance is going to suffer. And so that's what we try and promote. The best case we can do, right, around reality is that we can make some budget savings and probably maintain the level of performance, right? Because we're just reducing ineffective maintenance. That doesn't affect performance, just saves us money. And if we re-optimize the maintenance, we might have a minimal impact on performance, probably not going to be large. And again, it's going to perhaps help our costs a little. So probably maintain. And if you talk to a C-suite, this is probably, ideal for them, right? In ideal world, this is what a C-suite person would love to see. Reduce your costs, keep the performance where it is, and great, depending on your market conditions and stuff. But fundamentally, that would be a good outcome. With the optimize, the opportunity, and this is where I think the guts of maintenance is a profit center come from. If you can optimize and you can reduce breakdowns and therefore stop some of the unplanned failures, and you can increase throughput, then you can increase and improve performance, get more out of the business. Now, that's also on the proviso that you can sell the product, right? Like there's a market for the product that you're making, and the business can sell it, and it's cost effective to do so. But that's the kind of theory of optimization, and probably the start point of that statement. Does that make sense, everyone? Yep, good. So that dynamic of the balance is a really important first complexity, right? Like we've got to recognize that we're not optimized at any given point in time. So we've got to soften the promotion of, we reduce spend, we're going to see unplanned failures, and we're going to impact performance, right? We've got to soften that a little bit, and I think get more real around what can we do to find where the opportunities are in a very constructive way, as opposed to cost cutting under pressure and crossing our fingers and nothing goes wrong.
I've got a question.
Sure.
One of my frustrations is we've got quite a mature TPM program, and obviously on our production lines, and we've made quite good inroads in sort of breakdown reduction. So we're reduction 40% numbers on some of the lines. And the challenge I get is when I speak to finance is the maintenance don't see that cost benefit for the business, because it's performance and it's operations. So we're doing loads of good work. We're optimizing our PMs. We've got autonomous maintenance. We've got breakdown analysis. We're doing all this good stuff. And then I can't actually get finance to agree that I've
You're
got
the
any
source of
cost
it.
savings for the business. So that's I don't know what other guys on the call do, what they do. That's a frustration for me, because we're saving money by reducing basically our loss for the business is unplanned stops, breakdowns. So that's what we focus on, is those unplanned stops. And if we reduce them, then I'm on this constant battle with finance. Well, that's just.
Do you actually, is the performance improvement, is it realized in terms of more product and more sales?
Yeah.
And so what's it attributed to? Do you know what it's attributed to?
Sorry?
Do you know what they attribute those performance improvements to? Like, how do they classify it in any way? Do they go, well, that was delivered by something other than TPM, or they just don't talk about it?
No, it's just that, it's a benefit to the business as a whole, which is great. Yeah, but it doesn't actually come back to the maintenance team that there's a cost saving, so we can't put a dollar value on it or whatever. So that's my frustration. We're impacting performance of the business through maintenance, but there's no value comes back to us.
Yeah. Well, is anyone else on the call in a similar situation?
I was not in the situation, but I was just going to pass the comment that it potentially sounds quite siloed, John. It's like, maintenance responsible for costs and doing work, operations, getting product out the door, making the product. Is that how it feels? As opposed to having, like kind of joint objectives around the senior management
it's me
team.
From a selfish position.
Yeah.
I've been driving this TPM program across all the sites, and it's just, okay, I've got extra heads here, I'm doing this, we're making them, and what's the value? So the value is in the performance, and the business, the operations get that performance value, and
you just get hammered for extra costs.
Well, it's not so much that, it's if this is why I'm on the call, the C-suite say to me, okay, John, you've done all this good work, how much you're saving? The finance won't give me any money. They won't say I'm saving anything, because it falls within operations, and they get the benefit. So that's,
Do you measure OEE, John, overall equipment effectiveness, and actually look at where those, so if you've got equipment failure in the OEE, and you've got historical data where you can show that there were larger volumes of equipment downtime and equipment failure, and you've reduced that, you can put a financial dollar value to the amount of hours of downtime.
Yeah, our finance, our finance won't. They say no, all of that's overheads. The only way we can do it is if we've basically reduced the bill of materials on the product. So basically, if the breakdowns created waste, and that reduction in the breakdowns now creates less waste in terms of the bill of materials for the product, then we can claim that. But we can only claim that if we improve the standard for the next year, because it's got to be built in. So our finance won't. Everything they say is a fixed cost overhead, because there's no operators are getting no headcount reduction. The maintenance team is the same size. Okay, maybe there's a slight reduction in spare parts usage because there's less breakdowns a little bit, but that's peanuts, basically.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, you do really good work, which is our job. Eliminate that's the challenge. Zero breakdowns. That's my mantra. Zero breakdowns, and we're moving towards that. And then the business gets the benefit, but we as the maintenance team don't see that.
I tell you what's lovely to see, John, is you're passionate about this, because I can see that you've got strong ownership over it, which is awesome. I look, and there's no, in my opinion, there's no sort of magic silver bullet, right? Like I actually, and some of the stuff I put in the one pager around perhaps how we move away from where we are is, I mean, the communication is key, right? And it's about being really, really consistent in what you communicate and how you communicate it, and almost taking a bit of creative license on some of that stuff, I would say. But maybe we'll circle back to it a bit when we get to that slide, and we can kick it around with the rest of the group a bit more.
Unfortunately, I've got to leave on the hour. I've really enjoyed the discussion so far, so I'll have to catch up on the next session.
Yeah, all right. Well, let's make sure
really
we catch up on the steps. Good one. All right, we'll keep moving along. So the other complexity with what with the cost and we talked a little bit about this already, is you have to group things for optimal performance. So reliability theory is really cool around individual task optimization, and those optimization curves I put up on the screen are all usually focused on single task, single failure mode stuff, and that's why it's lots of data, lots of effort. So if you've done RCM or even PMO, maintenance task analysis, it's usually failure modes based. So you list failure modes, you list tasks, and you do data analysis, and you come up with an interval. And that's why it's a lot of effort, right? The problem is then those tasks have to all be grouped, and you'll usually see grouping rules, right? Like, so we do that analysis, we have all these optimum intervals, and then now we've actually got to put it into master data structure, and that's where it gets complicated, right? And we lose some of the money that we think we might be able to save. You know, typical grouping rules, we do it by labor, intervals, online, offline, all those sorts of things. Is it specific asset based, route based? What, you know, how many tasks can we put in one package? What sort of duration can we live with? Do we use contractors in-house? All those things and many, many more that your organization would have complicates this balance that we talk about, and how we structure these costs and tasks together into packages. And the impact on that is really quite significant, even in the sense of benchmarking comparisons between different organizations, because data is structured in different ways across different organizations. I kid you not, I've had the experience where an organization went through a significant maintenance cost benchmarking exercise with a really reputable management consulting organization. They were deemed to be in quartile 4. In other words, they're really behind their competitors. And so the immediate pressure that comes from leadership is to move with a target to get them to Q3, I think I can't remember the exact numbers, don't quote me, but the example was good. So maybe it was into Q3 within 1 year, and into second quartile 2 in 2 years, right? So that's the sort of pressure, right? We just want to be as good as our competitors. It kind of makes sense. They embarked on a maintenance cost reduction exercise, large organization, and different regions started to do this in different ways. One region kicked off a very detailed task-based sort of analysis to optimize, right, and do the best they could, because they didn't want to invoke more risk by just doing arbitrary cuts. So that makes sense. Part of that study, of course, is to go, well, what do you currently spend? Because we need to understand what you currently spend. So when we do this analysis, we can tell you how much money we've saved, right? That's pretty logical, makes sense. They could not tell us what they spent. We're like, what do you currently spend in this region on maintenance? And they're like, we don't know. I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? Like, it's got to be, these are SAP users, right? Can't you get out of SAP? It's got hours in there, but it hasn't got dollars, and that depends on the resource. And then can we go get the resource costs? Well, we've got an average. Oh, and by the way, that doesn't include contractors. We don't know what they cost because they're on some weird, agreement from a contract perspective. So they literally, they've done a benchmarking exercise which uses data. I don't know where they got the data from or how they structured it or what assumptions they made, but they've used data. They've done an assessment which has driven the C-suite to go, we need to move to second quartile in a certain time frame. Yet when we actually come to dig into the detail, they actually couldn't tell us what the numbers were. And so that's really impactful, and it's the sort of thing I'm talking about here. That's a disaster. But even in the way that we structure data, if we do it very well, makes it very hard to benchmark. And that's why I'm really wary of benchmarking studies, because it's all about how the data is classified and how it's analysed and how it's then compared. And the degrees of freedom you have with grouping tasks together is a little complicated depending on the operational environment you're in, because you may not have the influence over operational plans to even adjust certain strategies that have significant impact on costs. So you've got to be very clear about that as well. And often, if you do some assessment around, well, what tasks can we chop out and those kind of things, if they're very marginal tasks, they may not make an impact, because you know, if you pull a single task out of an 8-hour package of work that's got, I don't know, 60, 50 tasks in there that are quick checky type tasks, pulling 1 or 2 out really doesn't have an impact, even if you've got thousands of those assets, because no one's going to change the 8-hour package of work to 7 hours and 50 minutes. And even if they do you really save any money? So it's you know, you got to be really careful with this stuff in terms of the focus area that you're looking to save the money because of these complications. And then we've already talked about this one, so I'm going to skip over it pretty quick. But the other thing that can confuse people is the time between changes and impact on performance, particularly C-suite people. Short view, I'm looking at this year's costs and next year's costs. And of course, depending on your assets, if you've got like activities that are like 5-year type tasks, and you did it last year and then you drop them out, well, you're not going to see any impact on costs for another 5 years. And the impact on performance might actually hit you in year 7 if there's any risk associated with it. So it's very important that we understand what we're playing with when we change anything cost-wise, and when the impact might be, because we can reinforce this viewpoint that we can reduce costs. And if in 2, 3, 4 years' time we see some performance impact, people generally don't make the connection back to when the cost was reduced. So it's very important that we understand that. So we dug into that a little bit. And in the interest of time, I'm going to jump straight into this one, which is my one slide on, well, okay, given all that, right, how do we actually maybe start making an impact? How do we start trying to turn this around? I think, and it's like I said, there's no silver magic bullet here, right? But I think it's very important that we first understand the C-suite's view. So hopefully we've covered that in the slides. It's very important for us to understand that maintenance is but one thing to them, and it's one line in the cost part of their P&L, whether it's fixed or variable or both, that they're going to try and drive down. That's the level of their the energy they're going to put on maintenance costs, right? It's like reduce it. So given we understand that, then it's about us doing some awareness and education. Now, and I think you need to educate the whole organisation on the complexity of this balance, and then you got to align on the organisation understanding that this is a constant process, right? Like you don't optimise maintenance and get the costs at the sweet spot and then leave it and forget it, because it's just always needs to be changing. So given all that, you know, it's not like you can send an email out and go, hey, we need to do some awareness to the C-suite, so let's book a 4-hour Teams call, because that's just never going to work, right? So it's about how do we create the awareness? How do we do some education without actually being able to do that? So here's my advice. Now, you know, again, I don't have the magic answers, but these are the sorts of things that I would be thinking about and executing and doing, and see what you can get some traction with. But I would certainly create a one-pager with key definitions, like the ones that I sort of shot up on the screen. But use your own, use what your organisation's used to, but do simplify them, right? Like you don't want to have a million definitions around how you maintain things and what kind of tasks you have and how you structure your costs, but really simple key definitions so that everyone is clear what you mean by certain tasks as it relates to how you talk about costs. And I'd create a sort of a cheat sheet of relationships in there as well, right? Like this is the balance, you know, so educate people on routine maintenance, maybe correctives and breakdowns, and the balance that we're playing with. And have the bullet points in there, right, around the complexities, the time frame between budget changes and performance issues, for example, was a complexity. Lining up the operations plan, all the things that like create this sort of complexity that people need to understand. Because I think sometimes we complicate that rather than simplify that for the conversation with the C-suite. Try and be consistent with the terminology then, and even classify work if you can in alignment with that with those key definitions, right? So start talking that language in everything we do from a work management perspective through to perhaps reliability or continuous improvement, and then budgeting and costs. Certainly utilize the terminology in budget discussions, right? When we're having a budget discussion, we talk, and if we're talking about tasks, let's classify them that way, right? So we line up with the definitions. Is it a big corrective activity, right? Big shutdown that's full of corrective activities, for example. Let's classify their work that way so we understand what it is. And then I would build into that budget discussion like a couple of key things around, if we start to challenge the budget and we're going to reduce costs, so we're going to defer things or reduce things, let's start quantifying what the impacts of that change is, be that a performance or a time or a cost issue. So I think I would be adding some columns to my budget sort of worksheet, right, and start putting some classifications in there and some clarity around the impact, and referring back to the one pager of how we talk about things. And I would document the assumptions, right? So let's not just put in big, broad numbers that people don't know where they've come from. If we've worked that out some way, even it might not be accurate, it might be might not be completely data driven. We haven't analysed, I don't know, work order history and come up with it, but we've based our decision making on some content that we have in our head or someone else's head, or a bit of data over here, a bit of data over there. Like, I would be putting that into the spreadsheet, particularly for key actions that we've got, so people can see it. And this is the part about getting what's out of our heads and is putting stress on our shoulders into someone else's remit, right? Like, let's quantify the risks that we see that's there with some variables that we think are realistic. People can challenge them, they can debate them, they can maybe even change them, but at least then the risk is out of us or at the asset management department and into a broader conversation. And I think be realistic. We, as asset managers, we have to be realistic and accept there's always opportunity to maybe improve is not the right word, to maybe align and optimize costs to deliver a performance target that we've been given. So it's like always be seen to tackling performance and costs, right? That's how we talk about things. It's how we think about things. And it's an ongoing review that we require. So they're the sorts of things, I think, which, if they're done consistently, like, you don't send out a one pager and solve the problem of communicating with the C-suite, because it's hard to get their attention. So it's about small bits of information with a lot of consistency. So when we talk about the budget, build the one page. Every time you send communication, it's like the one pager goes out with it, right? Here's the budget submission with the one page guidelines of terminology and relationships or something, right? So I would just get really repetitive about that stuff. Obviously, if you get the chance to present, then it leads presentations, right? Get everyone on the same page, because you want to get people in the frame that if they challenge a cost, we want it to be a data-based conversation. Even if the data is an assumption, you want a data-based conversation, not a subjective conversation. And so that's the stuff I would build into these budgeting spreadsheets or whatever format you use for that discussion. So there's a broad dump from me on the sorts of things I would certainly be doing if I was in an organisation to try and help tackle this and get everyone on the same page. Definitions, consistency, and repeat. Anyone got any questions, any comments? Anyone want to add anything else into that that's perhaps they've done that's worked, that's got a bit of traction? I don't know. Anyone got anything to add?
Yeah, I think very interesting. So thanks very much, Jason. The one thing I was interested, because you said we stand behind being experts. So something that we've done is created what we call a benchmark model. So we've got about 190 breweries worldwide. So we look at all different factors to then come out what we would say should be their maintenance cost. But obviously we've decided those factors. So I'd be quite interested if other people or something we could within the network have a look at. So what other factors should we consider? Because we've done that sort of internally, but whether we've picked the right things as well.
Just for the group, Adam, and thanks for chiming in. What when you say factors, give us an example of a factor or a couple of factors that you're talking
about. So you could have different factors. So it could be performance. So it could be what's the level of breakdown, or we call it unplanned. It can be other things. So like we call it landed costs. So what's the cost of getting a spare? So it might be different in Papua New Guinea compared to the Netherlands. Then it can be resource costs. It can be what's your asset base. And then also what's your maturity in terms of, we have quite wide variations in terms of maturity of our asset care program. From brewery, we have a TPM program, so we have breweries at what we call silver level going for gold, but we might have other ones that even before getting onto the TPM program as well. So we use that. We don't call it C-suite in Heineken, but we created a benchmark, because it then means that people can look at it and they get confidence that when a brewery puts forward its budget, if it's against the benchmark, then that's based on data from a very large set as well. But I'm quite keen to understand whether we've picked the right components in that, and I can share more another time, because I don't think anything in it is that sort of like a silver bullet. But we've picked from a large data set a way to benchmark costs worldwide as well.
Yeah, and you 119 facilities, you said, right?
190. Yeah.
190. Well, so you got a good data set, right, for benchmarking internally. Yeah, that's excellent. But the point is
scales as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's good. It's a good question. I don't know if anyone's got some comment now, but I mean, a session around that kind of conversation, I'm sure people would love to have, because it's it's very interesting to understand what do we look at to understand if we're in control or out of control. It's a good question.
And I think the other part is then we try to help them with taking out bad costs. So rather than just saying if your cost is too high, so where have we seen bad costs taken out to deliver the actual budget that you should be on compared to that benchmark, not just take cost out. So how do you eliminate the bad costs back out as well?
Oh, I like that. That's really good language. Yeah, I like that a lot. So, it's not about cost reduction. It's about finding bad costs.
Yes. Yeah, because we want this.
Excellent.
We want to improve performance at less cost, but it's not taking cost out. Yeah.
Yeah. I like it.
Just for the sake. But yeah,
Good.
keen to learn with other experience as well.
All right, we've only got a few minutes. I think we're almost a little bit over time, and I think for what we targeted. But any other quick comments or questions before we?
No, we're good. We're good. We have got 10 more minutes, but it's folks, just shout up or whatever. We're all good.
All right, good. All right. Any other questions or comments then? All quiet. Anyway.
Yeah, I'll just say. I mean, I think it was. It's interesting. It's making me also realise the mess that our data's in. I mean, the challenges of trying to categorise some of these costs, and we work with Maximo. We have some additional tools for tracking contractor hours and costs, which connect back to the work orders, and then you've got a whole section of sort of direct PO expenditure that's often not tracked back to. So it's like a riddle, actually, and trying to analyze that. Even now we start to introduce more tools, things like Power BI connected directly to the Maximo database, so we can slice and dice it a little bit more. But it takes a significant amount of resource, actually, to put some sensible analysis on the table. But I think what you present here is some interesting ways, and homework for me is to go and work out how I can apply that with the data sets that I've got.
I think it's interesting, right, to think. I mean, you're not alone, mate, right? Like, I mean, that's the typical state, I would say, for many organisations, and I think it's useful to put yourself in a executive's position, right? Whose job, and remember, it's their job. Their job is to drive the cost down. That's what they're there for, right? To make sure, yes, we do it safely and well, and everyone, all that sort of stuff. We don't harm the environment, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, they're there to drive costs down and revenue up. So that's their function as they see it. Now, if you put yourself in their shoes and you start to ask questions, right? Like, well, how much do we spend on maintenance? And then we all start shifting our seat a little bit, because it's, well, it depends. What do you mean? Like, on what exactly? And you mean including contractors or excluding, or you know, materials or not? Like what? And so we unfortunately as a domain can get pulled apart really, really quickly, right? And so this is where part of the discomfort, I think, comes in, because I understand the complexity and I understand it is what it is. I'm not certainly not suggesting we're all competent. I think we're actually really, really all very competent and we're very experienced, but we're constrained somewhat with some of the systems we've got, some of the legacy stuff we're dealing with, you know, all those things adding up to, we're a little bit out of control. So working on some of the fundamentals, I think, is absolutely imperative for all organizations right now. I look across the asset management sort of domain and where it's heading right now, and everyone on the call would be well aware that, you know, like because we get pressure from the C-suite as well, right? The other part of their role is to make sure that we're doing all the right things. So they'll be asking us questions about, are we using AI? Are we got generative? Well, how are we using generative AI in asset management? Are we got predictive analytics? I see all this stuff online, you know, about predicting failures. What have we got going on there? We've got what, you know. So they'll ask all these questions based on what they see in here, because again, that's also their role. And so we can sometimes get thrust or pressured into some of those kind of, I don't know, initiatives or projects or whatever, and we get distracted a little bit. We don't have the resources or the time to deal with some of the foundational elements. And to me, the organizations that have the discipline, if you like, to perhaps even war a little bit on some of the investment in the cool stuff and sort out the fundamentals, or at the very least do it together, then they're the ones that'll win. Because you can't keep layering on sort of technology on top of a really shaky foundation. It just doesn't work, in my opinion. We'll come collapsing down at some point.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I think an observation from me is going back to what you said at the very beginning, Jason, about you know, going through those changes, decentralized maintenance, centralizing maintenance, and that feels like the levers that the C-suite have got to pull, because, you know, what can we do? We can do a reorganization, you know, rather than having that kind of foresight or that in-depth understanding that there are potentially other things to do. So I think the other potential thing I'd throw into the overcoming complexity, or shall I say influencing the organization, is making sure that, as you know, the kind of the middle management, the senior management, or the frontline people, is that there is a sponsor within the C-suite who does understand those things and understands the other like activities that could potentially be undertaken, who could act as an influencer for us in order to ensure that those considerations are made, that there is like a consultation, or, do you know what I mean, rather than going down one path that's potentially damaging and destructive and distracts you from the work that you know will add the value. Having that key person in there who will make the case and try to influence the decision into another direction.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you want to probably try and find the person who's got some open ears, if you can. Yeah. I mean, a little bit out of our control, right? Absolutely, we need to try and develop that sponsor, find the person who'll listen. I think the things we can do is all the stuff we talked about, right? Like fix our foundations, be consistent in our communications. Like I think you know, if you imagine, I mean, I feel a little bit for graduates that come into asset management now in some capacity, because it's a really quite broad domain. There's several aspects associated with it now, and there's acronyms galore, there's technology galore, there's, you know, and we overcomplicate it. We use millions of different terms to mean the same thing, and in an organization, a single organization, one of the simplest best things I think people can do, particularly large organisations with multiple sites, is to create that kind of single taxonomy for asset management, like on one page. That not here's our asset management policy with 50 pages of stuff. Like, here's the one page. This is how we talk about things, and this is what it means to us. So you can start being really consistent in getting people understanding what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So in like my world, then I always refer to it as talking the reliability and maintenance language. So treat it as another language in the same way you would Spanish or French or whatever it may be, and start to build that language and then share it and make it standard across the board. So like, I'm in a global role, global organization, so I have the standard language challenges, but then how do we create that common language so that we can speak it fluently across the different sectors of the business? And that, I think, to your point, Gary, about the sponsor, is finding someone that can translate between your reliability and maintenance language and the C-suite language. And that's the challenge, and that's quite a unique character. But that's the challenge. But yeah, we constantly talk about this common language and speaking in the same way, regardless of where you are within the business, making sure that we understand each other.
Great. All right. Any other comments to wrap it up, or final questions?
Any more comments? No. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Fantastic, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks, Jason. I thought the discussion was brilliant. To Adam, to your point about the further discussions, we are here to put together stuff that you are looking to learn from and to do. So if you do have any thoughts or suggestions about content or discussions or roundtables or anything like that, that's what we're here for. So please drop me a line. You will be pleased to know that we have another one of these masterclasses in the 17th of April, and it's actually slightly different. It's with a NASA flight director who is talking about leadership in their maintenance and high reliability performance teams. So it's slightly different. Hopefully there isn't a tariff on the fact that these folks from NASA are going to speak. Hopefully that's not going to happen. But that will be on the 17th of April, and we've got various other things that are coming up as well. So please keep in touch. You will see I've put some links to the mainstream community in the chat, and also to the event that we have got coming up end of the year. Well, that's down the track. So just to keep you abreast of it as well. Folks, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I thought the discussion was great. I hope you enjoyed it. Jason, brilliant. Thank you so much. I know it's late in the day for you. It's getting towards bedtime, so it's probably a game of pool for you in your wonderful pool table, which I don't know if folks can see, but it's just behind him. I think you might have missed it. You might have misted it over, so we couldn't see it, but I saw it. But thank you for joining us, and it was brilliant. And yeah, folks, any questions at all or thoughts, please give me a shout. So have a great day and enjoy the sunshine, and we'll see you very, very soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, cheers, everybody.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, folks.
Cheers.
See ya.
Bye.
Cheers, Ollie.